Okay, so here's my Java source code for my SQL Server basic project for students. Okay, so it's got Java code in here and the necessary libraries you need for connecting to SQL Server. So this is all for SQL Server. And if you scroll down here, there's a README. There's nothing there at the moment, but I'm going to be updating that later today. So there's going to be instructions and further information here. So scroll down and make sure you have a good look at the README down the bottom there. It's going to have a lot of information. And also, so the main thing we're interested in here is the two subfolders. So there's an SQL Server Basics there, which is a template with placeholders for students. And then there's a GUI version of that, which builds a basic GUI application. So all the code in here is for TextPad or NotePad or NotePad++ or any of those sort of basic editors. If you're using NetBeans or whatever, the code's different, okay? But I need to do an updated video for NetBeans. This is just for the TextPad or NotePad users at this stage. Okay, well, those basic editors like that. Okay, there's other code in here. For example, there's the GUI code and there's the server basics again. So these are the updated projects where all the code's been written and all the placeholders have been filled in. Okay, so if you get stuck, you can look at these, but where you want to be starting really is in these subfolders here. Start with the basics, and when you get the basics version for a console app working, then move on to the GUI version. Okay, so and there's it's all MIT license. It's all completely free for anyone to use, and that's the library there. So our Java program is going to load this library in. And then it can access SQL Server databases directly. Okay, so and each of the subfolders includes that jar file, so we can just load that in directly. Don't have to worry about which folder it's in. It's got multiple copies. Okay, so let's download the source code, and we do that by clicking the code button here and then selecting download zip. Okay, so there's the zip file I just downloaded from GitHub, and I'm going to extract that. So I'm going to go. And I could use 7-zip, which is a great freeware zip tool, but I'll assume not everyone has that, okay? And you might be running on lab machines or whatever. So I'm just going to use the plain old built-in Windows extraction for zips. So I'll go extract. Okay. Oh, and this little step here. So what I did was I right-clicked. You can right-click and go extract if you want, or you can right-click and drag it. I always right-click and drag it, then I just go extract. You get a much more compressed pop-up menu. Okay, so extract. And I'm just going to extract it to the same folder because it's got subfolders already built into it. Okay, so extract it to the same folder where I'm working and go extract, and there it is there. So it's been extracted. Okay, and that's basically the code we saw over here in our GitHub. Okay, so it's just this, all this code here is now being brought down to our local machine. Okay, and where we want to start is in the basics. So we'll start with the basics. Okay, and then we'll move on to the GUI. Okay. So let's start with the basics. Okay, so I'm in the SQL Server Basics, the template with placeholders subfolder. So we're starting with the basics, and then we'll move on to the GUI later. And there's the project file. Okay, and there's also another file in there, which is the jar file. That's the drivers or the utilities that let us connect to SQL Server. So those two files must be in the same folder. You can have them in different folders, but I'm just keeping it simple. Okay, keep them all in the same folder. Makes it much easier for us at this stage. Okay, so a quick walk through the code, and this code I'm showing is for Java 8, and it will work with Java 7 as well. So Java 1.8 or 1.7. People might say, "Oh, your code's way out of date. We're now up to Java 16." Yes, we are, but Java 8 is in long-term support until 2030. So another 9 or more years of Java 8 at this stage, and they might even extend it. Okay, so Java 8's a long way from dead. And a lot of developers are using it because it doesn't include all the extra stuff and the changes that were made in later versions of Java, which sort of ruined Java a bit, really. But anyway, that's another topic. Okay, so Java 8 or Java 7 is what you want to use, but Java 8's the best. Okay, and the reason why it only works with Java 7 or 8 is because I need to change the load jar file library method to make it work with Java 9 or 10 or whatever. Okay, so this method only works with Java 7 or 8. Okay, so a bunch of imports, usual sort of stuff. Some strings here for connecting to the database, just some connection strings. Okay, and this is really where you've got to use some magic here with your SQL Server setup. Okay, you need to get the connection string right, otherwise you can't get anything right. I'm connecting to a patients database, which is a database I've created. So if you've created a database in your SQL Server, and it might be on a network somewhere, so you'll need to change this so it points to the network server. For example, I've left my connection string in here for when I was connecting to Azure. So if you've got an SQL database on Azure that's made so it's accessible from outside of Azure, then you can connect via a string, something like that. So SQL Server followed by the web link to your server, to where SQL Server is running on a server, and then the database you want to connect to. Okay, so it's going to be something like that, but it can take a bit of messing around to get the connection string working. There is definitely an art to it. And also, whether you want to use trusted connection or not, you can change your connection string to have trusted connection up here, and then you don't have to worry about a username and password. Okay, so there's a whole lot of options and things you can do there. Okay, and the first thing we're looking at here is this load jar file. Okay, and like I said earlier, this only works with Java 7 or 8. It doesn't work with Java 9 onwards. So if you're using Java 9, forget it. I need to update the code. And I was really happy when I spent a fair bit of time on this code. And this code basically does what the NetBeans command add library does. Okay, but I'm writing the actual code to do it from first principles. And I was so happy when I got this working, when I first got the database working with Java, that I said, now I don't have to use effing NetBeans, because I was so sick of NetBeans. It's so slow and so, yeah, TextPad's so much faster. And I wrote, woohoo. Okay, so that's comment still in my code. I've still left it there. And it was based on code that was here at this Stack Overflow address. Okay, so it was based on code there, but I did change it and improve it. It doesn't work with Java 9 onwards, like I said, but there's possible solutions, and I haven't had time to explore those yet. That's why it's Java 8 or Java 7. Okay, so inside the load jar file library method, you can pass in a jar file name, and I won't worry about this code too much, but we're basically opening a file pointer or file object based on that jar file name that we're going to load, and then we're using a class loader to load it in. Okay, and it's got some special commands here to get the class loader, declare the method, and set accessible to true, and then invoking it and setting it up so it's ready for use. And if all of those commands there work fine, then we don't get an exception. Otherwise we do get an exception, and you'll see something like this appear on the screen, and your program will exit because I've got a system exit there. Okay, so that you don't have to worry about writing this code. This is all given to you in my source code. So that's the hardest part of the code, and I've given you the basic code there already, so you can just use that and move on. Okay, so this is where you want to start writing code down here. So we're going to get a string from the database. We're going to get a number of rows in the database, and then we're going to get a table of data, where it could be strings, dates, integers, whatever, floats, and we're going to get all of that into an object array, okay, a two-dimensional table array. Okay, so it's like a grid of rows and columns. Okay, so you will remember that object is the parent of all classes in Java. Okay, so behind the date class is an object further up the hierarchy, and behind whatever class you're talking about, there's always an object class right at the top of the hierarchy. Okay, so date, int, string, float, boolean can all be converted to an object. Okay, so there's this 2D array will be a table of data coming from the database, and we'll get that shortly as well. Okay, and on to the main method. So the first thing we're doing in the main method is trying to load our jar file, which is our code that lets us access SQL Server. And then I've got some queries. So I'm getting string from the database there. Select count star from a patient table called cPatient. So I'm displaying the message counting number of patients in the table. I'm running the query, which is calling the method up above, and then displaying the result. Okay, so we're going to write the code for that now. So we're going to fill in the code for this getStringValueFromSQLDatabase. That's the first bit of code we need to write. Okay, and so let's go back up here. So that's what we're going to be writing now, is the code for that. Actually, before we do that, let's just do one thing. Okay, so we're just going to compile and run this code as it is. Okay, so the placeholders here, it's just going to return something. It's just returning, basically the integer one's returning 0, the string one's returning a blank string, and the object one is returning the 2D array, is just returning an object which is null. Okay, so and I've got an if test there, so our program won't crash. So if array 2D is not null, that gets returned from that method. we're going to print it to the screen as a table, a nice table of data. Okay, but we're not worried about that just yet. I'm just showing you that the code will run. So let's run that. Control 1, Control 2, and there's the output. Okay, counting number of patients in the table, number of patients. So I'm just proving there that our code will compile and run. Okay, we're not accessing the database yet. We're going to write that code. Okay, so once again, let's start with this method, get string value from database. Okay, so let's write the code for here. Okay, so we want to connect to the database, and to do that you need a connection object. So you might see the imports I had up here. There's a whole lot of stuff that looks like database stuff. Connection, driver manager, statement, results set metadata. These are all classes built into Java that you need to work with databases. Okay, and we're going to work with a database which is an SQL Server Database, but these are like the bridge to the database that connects with that SQL Server jar file that we looked at earlier. Okay, that we had a quick look at in the folder. Okay, so let's go back down to our getStringFromDatabase method. We're going to write the code for here now. Okay, so we need a connection object, connection, and you can call it whatever you like. Connection equals new driver manager dot get connection. Okay, and get connection takes 3 parameters. It takes a URL and a username and a password. Okay, and you might remember that I've got those 3 as constants at the top of my class here. So let's not put values here. Let's use the constants we've already made. Okay, so that's database URL down there. And I might move it on to the next line so you can read it more easily. And I'll use bookmarks, so Control F2 so I can jump around to it. And I'll make a bookmark up here as well, Control F2, so I can jump backwards and forwards. And we'll use the username and the password. We're going to fill in these details later. Whoops, and the password. Whoops, password. So we're going to fill in these details later, don't worry. Okay, and then password. Okay, so we're connecting using the 3 static constants we've got at the top of our class. Okay, then we want to execute or create a statement object. Statement. You can call it whatever you like. I'm just calling it the lowercase version. Equals new results connection. So we're using our connection, whatever this object here is. That's what you're going to create a statement based on. And it's .create statement. And that's it. No parameters. And then we're going to create a result set object. Result set equals, and it's statements. We're going to use our statement object here to query the database. Execute query. And we're going to run our query, which is the SQL which is passed in. So we can just run whatever that query there is. We're assuming it's a query that's going to be executable. No errors and things like that in it. Okay, so we're assuming that's a valid SQL that comes in. Okay, and now what we do is work out the number of rows. Okay, I might put some comments in as well. So here we're connecting to the database. And here we're executing the query. Okay, and then we want to look at the result sets. Before we start looking at the result set, let's just get the metadata and work out what we've got. Okay, make sure we've got some data that came back. Okay, so we're going to use the result set class, result set metadata class. Metadata. All meta means is data about the data. So this is going to tell us data about our query that just ran. Did it return any data? How many rows? How many columns? That sort of thing. Okay, so metadata just means data about the data. You know, how many rows, how many columns, that sort of thing. So it's going to be our results. We're going to run it against our result set, and it's going to be .get metadata. Okay, and let's work out the number of columns that return. So int number of columns equals, and that's our metadata. Oops, could have put a metadata object there. Okay, and I like lining everything up. Okay, so metadata. Okay, I could call it result set metadata, but I'm going to be going off the screen here. I'm only recording in a little area of screen to keep the video small. Okay, so metadata was our object, so it's going to be metadata.getColumnCount. Okay, and then you could print that to the screen or whatever you want to do with it, if you want to. Okay, and let's then look at our result set, see what we've got in our result set, and we'll go while result set dot next. While that's true, okay, so while that's true, in other words, while there's data being returned from the database, we're going to run a loop and get the data from the database. Okay, and I'll just put another comment here. Get result set metadata. In other words, it's data about the data. About. Okay, and down here we're getting the query results. Results, something like that. Just whatever comment you think make it reasonable. And so while the result set next is true, we could do all sorts of things here. We could get the actual data and display it to the screen. But here we're just running a query and we want to count the number of rows. So we'll go number of rows, num_rows, plus. And num_rows is a constant, or is it an integer I created up here? So there's num_rows, that's where it's declared. So while the result set's got more data, get the number of rows out of it. And then we could get the data is equal to string.format %s. There's various ways you can do this as well. I'm just showing you one way. Result set dot get object. Okay, so what we're doing here is we're getting an object from the result set. In other words, we're getting some of the data that's returned. And we get object 0 because, get object 1 because object 0 is the heading. Okay, and we don't want the headings, we want the actual data that was returned. Okay, so when you do a select count star from a database table, it'll give you a heading that might be a count or number or whatever, and then in the next row after the heading, that's where the data is. That's why we're going to get object 1. Okay, and okay, so we should have, if we're just running a select count, we should have number of rows as 1, and this should return the count that was returned by the database. Okay, so number of rows will be 1, and that row will contain the count of whatever we're counting in the database. So in this example here, we're only expecting a single bit of data. So we are only expecting a single piece of data. For this query, we're just returning an integer from the database. Okay. So make sure that is what we got. Okay. So we're only expecting a single bit of data because this is returning an int. Or getString from the database, getString. Okay, so we're only expecting one single bit of data, getString. It's not strings, it's not string array, it's not string whatever. We're just getting a string from the database. So that's why we've got to make sure we've only got one bit of data come back. So if number of columns is not equal to 1, or the num rows is not equal to 1, then we've got a problem. Okay, so if the number of rows is not 1, or I think that should be num rows like that, lowercase n, yep, or num rows is not equal to 1, we've got a problem. So then we could say, we could then set data string to something else. Expecting one piece of data, and result contained. And you could tell it how many rows and columns, so we can see it in the error message if we need to. Plus columns and num rows plus rows. So we're just telling a bit of a story there for our error message that we're going to produce, or our return value that we're going to return from the method. Okay, we're going to say the error, we're expecting one bit of data, but the result contained whatever number of columns we got and whatever number of rows we got. It might be 0 or 2 or 3 or whatever. Okay, but we're expecting 1 and 1. And if both of them aren't 1, we've got an error. Okay, and then the next thing to do is to close our statement. So this is our statement object up here, this chap. So statement.close, and then you close your connection to the database. Okay, and that's our connection there, that's our connection object. So connection.close. Okay, now we're writing code here that can connect to a database. Okay, now we're writing code that's connecting to a database and querying a database and doing all sorts of things. And a lot of these lines of code here can raise exceptions. Okay, so this code as it is now won't compile. Okay, because there's exceptions we've got to deal with. Okay, so let's put all this in a try-catch block. Try. Okay, and then I'm going to indent all of that code, so it's all inside the one try block. Highlight all that code and press tab. And then catch, followed by something we want to catch, and then round curly brackets like that. Okay, so, and we can take it that to do now. We've now done that. Okay, we're going to fill this in. We're going to have a talk about this in a second. So that closing bracket there is for the opening bracket up here after the try. Okay, so I put everything inside that method that might cause an exception. So the connection creation, the statement creation, the result set creation, the metadata code, and all that sort of stuff. I've put it all into a try block. Okay. Now you can get fancy here and catch multiple exceptions. So you can give a different error message depending on what type of exception occurred. But I'm just going to give a single, I'm just going to catch a single type of exception. I'm going to catch the parent of all exceptions. So exception error. And all I'm going to do is set data string equal to, so that's our data string, and I want that error. Data string equals error plus, I'm just going to convert this error object to a string, error.toString. Okay, and that'll give us the heading of the error. So we won't get a full stack trace on screen. If we want the stack trace, we can do that as well. Let's do a stack trace, print stack trace, and that helps you work out what's wrong with your code as well. Okay, but generally you want to probably, well, leave them on, it doesn't matter. Okay, but you want to make sure you're generating an error somehow. And here I'm generating an error in the return result. Okay, and that's pretty well it. We're pretty well done now. So our code should compile. Get connection. Oh, I didn't finish. Get connection. New driver manager. Driver manager. Connection. Cannot find simple get connection. Ah, it's looking me right in the face. Okay, so we're not calling new here. We shouldn't be calling new. Okay, it's just connection equals driver manager dot. Okay, there's no new in there. Don't put new. New makes it give that error. Okay, it's just driver manager dot. Okay, that should fix that. Yep, all okay. Now probably what we should do is have a look at our database. Okay, make sure we've got a table or a query that we can run, and we probably want to also fix these up as well. Okay, so I've got a SQL server running on my local machine here, my local host. Again, like I said earlier, you'll want to make that string so it points at the one that you can use in the lab, or at your Azure host if you're using Azure. And I've got a table called DB patients. You might have a different database. You might have DB product works, or whatever the database is called, and you might be running product works queries. Okay, so I've got one called DB patients. So you might want to fix that up and your connection, but I've also got to fill in the username and password. And I've got to work out what they are, so I need to look them up. So back in a sec. Okay, so here's my SQL server, and you'll notice I've got a DB patients database in there. Got a bunch of databases. Doesn't really matter what database you use, just use whatever one, AdventureWorks, whatever the database you're using. And I want to open a new query for that database. And I'm going to go, let's have a look at the tables. And we've got the see patient table, visits and visit type. Okay, so select count star from see patient. And there it is, we've got 8 patients in there, and I can say select star from see patient, and we'll see the patients. Okay, so they are there. And so there's 8 patients there anyway. It's just made up data. These are just little temporary databases I've been creating just for demonstrations. Okay, so it doesn't matter what database you use, AdventureWorks or whatever database is available to you, or create your own. Doesn't take long to create a database and create some tables. You can do it through the GUI, or you can do it through SQL statements. I like doing it through SQL. For example, here's my SQL that creates this database. Okay, so it's just code here. If the database exists, drop it, and then create the database, and then if the tables exist, drop them, and then I create the tables, create the patient table, then I create the visit table, and then create the visit type table and the visit table, and put all the constraints in, so you get the private keys and foreign keys all working. And then I do the inserts to insert the data, so that I can insert patients. So there's Ginger Hamster going in first, Winston Beagle, Flappy Finch, and so on. I'm inserting all the patients. And then I insert the visit types. So there's various visit types there, and then the visits themselves. Okay, so, and I run some cross-check queries at the end. So that's what I like doing. I like writing the code. But if you want to do it all through the query, through the GUI, you can pretty well, a lot of it anyway. And SQL Server is pretty powerful. Okay, so another thing we might do while we're here is I might just create a user that can log on and use the database. So if you're set up as an admin user in the database, you don't really want to be connecting as an admin user, because the admin user's got access to all the databases that are in there. If you want to just pin it down to one database, if you want to give an application access to one of your databases, make sure you create a user just for that database, okay, or just for that application. So let's do that. We'll create a login, new login, and I'll call it patient login, okay, whatever, patient login, doesn't matter. And I won't give it Windows, I'll give it SQL Server authentication, and the password's going to be password. This is just a local database, it doesn't matter. Password, okay, password, and it's called patient login. Okay, so let's now put that in our code. So our username is going to be patient login, and our password is going to be password. Terrible password, but it's only for a simple little demo that I'm doing it for. Okay, you would never use that for a real password. Okay, and then we want to come down here to user mapping, and I want to go down to DB patients, and I want to give that data reader, data writer, owner. Yeah, might as well DDL admin. Okay. So in other words, we're saying that this user we've created can do everything to our DB patients database, but we're not giving them access to anything else. So all these other databases are still, this user can't even see them. So we can write an application, and the application can't get access to all of our databases, which is the right way to do it. You don't want to give anyone access to everything, okay, unless you really, really mean to. So let's click OK there, and that will create our user. Oh, doesn't meet your Windows policy, righto. So let's change the password to, let's see, 445.pword ampersand 99. Doesn't matter what your password is. I'm typing it in here so I can go Control C, and then I'll just paste it into each of those boxes. Control C, Control V, and click OK, and everything's fine. Okay, so now we've got a connection to our local database. We're connecting to the DB patients database, and we're going to be running connecting as that user patient login with that password. Okay, and this user can only get access to the DB patients. All of our other databases, they don't have any access to. So if someone steals our application and decompiles it, all they can get access to is our DB patients. That's all they can get access to. Okay, so just a little bit of security there we're keeping in mind. We're not giving anybody access to everything. Okay, now our query should run. So save our code, Control S, let's compile. Control 1, and run it, Control 2. And then we're getting 8. Okay, so we're getting the number of patients back is 8. Okay, so that's our Java code running. Okay, our Java console app worked beautifully. Okay, so that's probably enough for this video. We've done quite a lot. What we'll do next time is we'll do these other two methods. So we've done the getString from database. What we might do next time is get the number of rows in the results set. We might get that from the database. And then we'll move on to getting the an array of data from the database. So like a grid of data, like a spreadsheet grid, rows and columns of data. Okay, so that's what we'll do next time. Okay, so hope that was useful. Thanks for watching, and please join me in the next video.